Lauren Hollows for NOI Education Services, and today we are talking about ASQA's regulatory priorities for 2023, and specifically we're going to be focusing in on aged care. Okay, so ASQA does release every year a list of its regulatory priorities. These are kind of based on areas where there are higher non-compliances, areas where there are higher levels of risk. And so each year ASQA goes through and they do publish all of this information so that you can see if you're an RTO with one of these products on your scope or one of these cohorts. And you can just take that into consideration when you're doing things like applications for scope, re-registration, all of these sorts of things. So for example, aged care has been on the list for quite a few years now. Quite often, if you are a provider that is looking to apply to have aged care on your scope, it's a new product, it's not within a training package that you're used to delivering, it would not be unreasonable to think that it's going to potentially take a little bit longer for you to get this product on scope, and it may also involve a desktop audit or a site audit. So why is aged care a higher product? So part of it is because of the higher volume of students that aged care attracts, and the percentage of students that study aged care across our sector. Also, it does cross over with one of ASQA's other regulatory priorities, which is international students. It also has some interesting challenges when it comes to work placement. So certainly there are a lot of job seeker programs and international student programs that are run, and there is a requirement for job placement within the qualification. So there's a particular unit that requires 120 hours, and then there are several units in addition to that that also require assessment to be undertaken in the workplace. Now what this effectively means is that most RTOs need to make sure that they can get students into an aged care center for anywhere from 120 to 160 hours as a minimum. What that often involves is whether or not there are clear communication processes between students. So one of the things that we have seen historically being picked up in industry is that students are not informed prior to that they need to source their own placement. This is really big in the international student space. Not being clear with students about the requirement for work placement, not being clear with students about how work placement is undertaken, not being clear about who needs to actually source the placement. All of these sorts of things become big factors when we start talking about the risk factor for the qualification. So if you are delivering the Certificate 3 in individual support or the Certificate 4 in aged care, then one of the things that you want to do is make sure that you have really clear marketing so that all of those kind of key factors are explained. Now, one of the other areas that this is a concern for is because of what's called short duration of training. And this is where I think people can get very, very confused because there's quite a few factors that start to go into this. So when we talk about duration, what I'm meaning from duration is I mean from the point that they start the qualification to the point that they finish the qualification. And so there are a range of providers out there that historically have offered this qualification in as little as 2 weeks, which is literally impossible. But a lot of them will provide it as 2 weeks of practical, 2 weeks of training face-to-face, and then 3 weeks of placement on the job, 5 weeks, Bob's your uncle, you've got a qualification. So the short duration of training has been an issue. Realistically, this qualification does take, in my experience, I haven't seen brand new students come into this that can get through it in less than about 6 months, because you've got that work placement component. Even sourcing that work placement component can be really challenging. The other challenge that we've got with this is the evidence and how assessment is structured and how it is delivered. So I do see, particularly within this sector, just the same challenges that we see across everything else, which is basically that there is not clear observable assessments. One of the challenges for this one is documenting the interactions that occur. So obviously you have certain interactions that occur via simulation, and a lot of that stuff needs to happen when it comes to the things like, washing clients, a lot of the self-care services, the changing, the shaving, things like that. There's a couple of ones that can't happen in the workplace, and that, across most of the workplaces because of policies that get put into the workplaces. So things like the transitions between vehicles and things like that can be really, really challenging to organize. And then just the general supporting clients in line with their needs. So we obviously have a very specific model that we put in place in individual support, and it is a client-centered approach. Now, client-centered approaches can be really challenging when you start working in aged care and when you start working with dementia patients, because it can become very, very challenging for those patients to support themselves. Historically, also, a lot of RTOs have chosen the palliative care unit. Completely understand the rationale for choosing the palliative care unit. It is necessary to understand how to process and deal with the palliative aspect of aged care training. However, effectively assessing that and effectively evidencing that, incredibly challenging within that particular field. So looking at, how you address, one of the things that I would be saying to you is, if you are looking at and you're doing your planning for your 2021 qualification, because we've rolled obviously from the 15 version to the 2021, and a lot of providers are in that mix at the moment. Some of the things that you do want to consider is whether or not you are look at your unit selections really carefully. Consider whether or not you want to include that palliative care unit. There's the new requirement for the infection control, which kind of came in during COVID. So looking at how, that's a relatively easy one to deal with. A lot of RTOs tend to cluster and then leave all of the competencies to be deemed competent at the end. So opening up all of the units. If you are delivering as a funded provider, you really need to very clearly think about how you're going to stagger out your competencies throughout that period, because most state funding bodies don't like to see more than about 6 units open at one particular point in time. And then I would also just be, very carefully and very clearly and concisely talking about how you manage the work placement, which units you've determined are done as assessment in the workplace. So, in my experience, and I'm aware that this is kind of a contentious issue, the 120 hours in my personal perspective is not sufficient. So the assessment tools that we write for this qualification, they do require 160 hours, and that's because a lot of the self-care sort of skills and things like that factor in separately. So the way that we build the qualification is we require 160 hours. Obviously 120 are focused on that particular unit, but there are a lot of other skills that cross over that are already nominated within that unit. Identify the hours that you're running for the qualification, the hours that you're running in the work placement, how those hours are going to be observed. So, again, one of the things that I see fairly consistently is that they say, oh, we have we have the students go out for 120 hours and we go out and visit them once. You can't observe all of those skills that you have to observe over one occasion. Certainly with our assessment tools, we require a minimum of 3. And we find that that's a good amount for assessors to be able to observe if they're doing like a 2 to 3 hour session one-on-one. Traineeships, it's obviously much more ideal because you're seeing them over a much longer period of time. But if you're asking your trainers to go out on 1 or 2 occasions to sign off the skills that you need to observe for that unit and for the other units that require work placement, I really struggle to see how your trainer is actually going to be able to observe all of that. Just the timing, the timing would have to be so bloody perfect that they were happening, like that they were performing the skills and that the clients actually needed them to perform those skills. It would be very, very surprising. So generally, I think 3 visits is kind of your minimum. Ideally, you're provided with a lot more. Your assessors are provided with a lot more because there's a lot of evidence that they actually need to record. And you should have a relatively comprehensive logbook that the students are completing as well, in order for them to be able to show a lot of that evidence when they get those assessor visits out on site. Anyway, that is it for the ASQA regulatory priorities for aged care. We will also be talking about international students in another video. As always, videos are dropping every Wednesday and Sunday. If you guys like this content, please smash the like button, click the follow and the notifications and the yada, yada, yada. to keep all of this content coming out to you. If you have recommendations for content that you would like to see, please drop a comment below. If you have any other questions about this particular video, you can also drop a comment below and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Otherwise, thank you very much, guys. Hope you have a great day. This is Lauren Hollis for NOI Education Services.